Hi, I'm George Pino with Commercial Brokers International, and I have a great guest for you guys today. This is Scott Mayer with EPG Attorneys, Eniston, Pham, and
Glass.
All right, so they're located here in West Los Angeles. They are a legal firm that specializes in real estate. So stay tuned. This is going to be some really great information for everybody. Now, Scott, I get this a lot from a lot of clients or people that I'm talking to at dinner, and they always ask, well, really, what's the difference between commercial and residential real estate? I mean, doesn't the state protect us all for, and treat us all equally? And I always have to come back and kind of explain a little bit. It's a little different because purchasers or tenants in commercial property are held to a different standard than they are on the residential side. And what are your thoughts on that, or why? Why is that?
So commercial property is revenue producing property. Residential is a place where we live. The government, not just here in the state of California, but across the country and the federal government as well, tend to protect owners of residential property more so than commercial property because of the differing degrees of expertise and knowledge. People that buy homes are generally considered novices without much experience with real estate acquisitions, whereas owners of commercial property are generally considered to be experts in the field.
Yep. I can see that, how people can kind of see that, and I think there's also a lot of confusion, especially because everyone is aware of like certain laws, like fair housing laws and things like that don't apply to commercial real estate.
Correct.
And and because we hear this on occasion when we have a startup company that's coming in saying, how can a landlord not like my business? Why can they say no to that? That's discrimination. And we really try and explain, no, it's not really discrimination because it's not protected. The use is not protected. They're not discriminating because of the person.
Correct.
As long as you're not along those lines. But there's a lot more leeway for a landlord to say no on a commercial lease than there is on a residential, is my understanding.
Correct, because the landlord is looking for a predictable income stream. And so the tenant's use, the tenant's finances, the tenant's experience are all very relevant to a commercial landlord. And that's not necessarily the case for a person that owns a home. Yeah.
Well, a lot of commercial leases too, I think, they actually require the tenant to be responsible for certain things like maintenance and maintenance repairs, property tax, insurance if it's a triple net lease. And as such, I think there's probably less protections because it's also the tenant's responsibility to do that, as opposed to on a residential, a landlord has a duty to provide housing that is in good condition.
Yes, there are laws here in California that require a landlord of a residential property to maintain the home in a certain livable, habitable condition. And if those laws are violated, the tenant has claims. In a commercial situation, yes, the tenant oftentimes has those responsibilities and not the landlord.
They probably have less offset rights as well, because I know in residential you have a lot of rights to, like if the landlord doesn't make certain repairs, you can actually deduct it from the rent if you've done, if you've given proper notice to the landlord. And, really there's no laws that I'm aware of that necessarily govern that on the commercial sense. It's really the lease, and the lease and how it's negotiated.
Right. So here in California, as you mentioned, we have the repair and deduct after you've given your residential landlord notice. So, for example, if the air conditioning goes out, then you have the right to give the landlord notice. If it does not respond in a timely fashion, then you can have repaired and deducted from your rent. Of course, that can lead to legal issues because oftentimes a residential landlord will take exception. So you have to be very careful, and it's probably the smart thing to consult an attorney before you do something like that.
I would think so too, because at least from my experience as a landlord on the residential side, when we used to have a lot of apartment buildings in Los Angeles, I know that we always had some issues, not always had some issues, I should say that on occasion we'd have a tenant that would come in and their expectations were not necessarily the norm of what would be expected. It was maybe a little bit higher, where, you know, for instance, case in point, I had a tenant at one time come to me and say, "You need to replace my carpet." And when I point blank, I said, and she said, "Your manager's refusing to replace it. You need to replace my carpet." And I came in and I asked her, "Well, why do we need to replace the carpet?" And she goes, "I got a big hole in it." And I said, "Okay, let me take a look at it." I walked in, it was in her living room. And so when I walked in and looked down and said, "Sure enough, you got a big hole here." He goes, "I'll have it replaced tomorrow, but you're going to pay me back for it." And she goes, "What?" I said, "Well, the hole's oddly shaped like an iron. What happened?" And she said, "Yeah, I left my iron on it and it burnt through." Now this, because it was her and her responsibility, you know, she expected us to replace it for free and do all this, and, you know, as a health and safety issue, we had to replace it right away. I wanted to replace it right away, but we were also requiring a reimbursement from the tenant for the damage that they caused.
Correct.
And so I think a lot of times, without consulting an attorney first, if a tenant were to try and take those actions, it may not necessarily apply. Because I know if she were to try and hold back on that, she probably would have lost, depending.
Right.
I mean,
Well, she probably doesn't need to get an attorney. She just has to read her lease, because
Yeah.
I'm sure
there is that too. Sure.
every residential, every commercial lease places the burden on the tenant if they cause damage to make the repairs at
Absolutely.
their expense.
Absolutely. Almost every lease I've ever seen has it, but a lot of times there's different expectations. And, you know, I've seen just about everything, unfortunately, both on the commercial and residential side when it comes to those leases and tenants. It was quite interesting. Let's just say I'm very glad we no longer have a property management division. So,
Okay.
but no, it's definitely there. So I think ultimately, from what I'm hearing from you, is that, you know, there are more protections on the residential side, which is probably why also there are not as many residential purchases that have attorneys that are involved, as opposed to on the commercial side, where I see close to 80-90% having at least one attorney, but usually attorneys for both sides involved.
Well, and that's oftentimes because in the commercial situation, the agreements are all subject generally to negotiation, whether it's a lease, loan documents.
Yeah.
But in the residential side, the brokers who generally control the transaction, they are using form documents that have been prepared by attorneys.
Yeah. So, no, I definitely see that, but I think it's always wise to have a good attorney that's involved within the transaction when it comes to, especially when it comes to the commercial side.
And I'd even recommend it on the residential side. And why I say that is because I see quite a number of claims, lawsuits resulting from a failed residential transaction. It could be a failure to disclose by the seller. It could be that work was done on the home without permits. It could be, if it's a newly built home, there are construction defects. And so, because we all love our homes, they're our homes, you know, we want to make sure that we're protected. And so I would say if someone has the ability, the financial ability to bring a lawyer in just to review documents, I would advise that.
Okay. I would almost take that a step further and say that if someone should build the financial ability into their budget
Yes.
to be able to have an attorney that's reviewed, because the way I look at it, it's an insurance policy as well. You know, where you have, you know that you have an attorney that's reviewed this and that it's legally, everything is right. And that's can save you literally hundreds of thousands of dollars down the road. So it's almost like an insurance policy, making sure that it's done and done right, but also reviewing third-party reports, whether it's the
Correct.
title company, title report, and things like that. These are reports that, one, frankly, even a lot of real estate agents aren't that familiar with or how to read it or advise on it, for that matter,
Correct.
especially when it comes to endorsements. So it's always good to have an attorney that's going to step in.
Well, if the
You know,
broker in the transaction is making 3 to 6%, that can be a substantial amount of money. I think you're correct. If you set aside, it could maybe just be a few $1,000s.
Yeah.
Have a lawyer review documents and make sure that you understand whether it's a lease you're signing, whether it's a purchase contract you're signing, or as you said, the third-party reports, the title report, a survey.
Title survey, environmental, if it's
Yes.
yeah. So absolutely. Okay. So, I think in conclusion, I think we can all agree, attorneys, despite what Shakespeare said, can be good, all right? And should be used when it comes to your financial transactions and your investments, especially to protect your money that was hard-earned and that you've invested in. So you want to make sure that you want to have a good representation, not just on the brokerage sales side. Remember, sales agents are exactly that, sales agents. They're not legal advisors.
That's correct.
So you want to make sure that you have a good team on your side to protect everything that may go wrong in the transaction, or at least try and mitigate what may go wrong. All right, so I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and we're actually going to have a little bit of a series with Scott, so please stay tuned and watch for everything that's coming up. It's going to be some great advice for you to take advantage of, and in the meantime, if you need to talk to him sooner, we're going to have his contact information right below, right here for you. So don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks.
Thank you.